In this video, we are going to have a look at one of the more recent costing types, being activity-based costing. So first of all then, what is activity-based costing? So like I previously just mentioned, it is a very modern approach to cost a product. It is different to that of the traditional methods of absorption and marginal costing. However, it is a form of absorption costing. Activity costing aims to allocate overheads to cost pools prior to absorbing them into units using cost drivers. So a few key terms here then. A cost pool. Well, this is an activity that consumes resources and for which overhead costs are going to be identified and are going to be allocated. For every cost pool, there has to be a cost driver. Obviously, you now need to know what a cost driver is. So a cost driver is a unit of activity which consumes resources. This can also be known as a factor which influences the level of cost. So identifying activities. So firstly, we are going to have our logistical transactions. These are activities which are concerned with moving materials or people. It is tracking progress of materials or work through the system. We then have our balancing transactions, ensuring resources are available for operation. So a good example is having enough raw materials to actually meet your production requirements. It is quality transactions. We must ensure that our output or service levels are going to meet our quality requirements as well as our customer satisfaction levels. And we also have change transactions. So with this, we are required to respond to changes in customer demand, changes in design specs, a scheduling change, and a change in production, essentially keeping up to date with the modern world. So cost drivers then must be two things. They must be relevant and they must be easy to measure. They need to be relevant because there has to be a connection between the cost driver and the consumption of resources of an activity. It must be easy to measure because it needs to be easy, it needs to be straightforward. We can't have a long process in which it takes to actually identify the driver, but we need to be able to do that pretty quickly. There are different types of cost driver. So we have our transaction, our duration, and our intensity. So with transaction, the cost of an activity is going to be affected by the number of times a particular action will be undertaken. Duration, essentially this is affected by the length of time in which it takes to perform an action. And intensity is determined by looking at what resources were used. So the steps that can be taken to calculate full production cost per unit using ABC. Well, step number one is to group any production overhead into activities in accordance with how they are driven. You then need to identify the cost driver for each activity, which caused the activity cost to be incurred in the first place. At this stage, you can then calculate a cost driver rate for each activity and also absorb the activity cost into the product. The final step then, step number 5, is to then calculate the full production cost and or the profit or loss. So activity-based costing then can prove valuable and can prove more valuable than those traditional methods. Why? Well, if high overheads are relative to direct costs, activity-based costing is going to be more accurate. It is going to be more accurate when dealing with complex products or services, and if there is a wide, diverse product range. Tailor-made products are also going to be beneficial to be using ABC costing, as well as a variation on single and bulk purchase buys. So overhead costs then can be divided into the following types of activities. So it could be unit level, batch level, or product level, or could even be at a facility level. Of course, as with everything, ABC has both its advantages and disadvantages. So the advantage is it can be used in any situation, including those that are very complex. There is a deeper understanding of overhead costs and factors which will drive them. This is therefore going to lead to a fairer allocation of costs to products and services. Because of this being more accurate, it is going to allow for better cost control measures to be put in place, as well as improved accuracy of individual product costing. It can be applied beyond production. It can also work in both digital and service industries too. Contrary to all those advantages, there are some disadvantages. So it's not always going to be relevant. We still need to use cost allocations, which can be very subjective. What I see as being fit in one category, you may see as being fitting to another. With this in mind, we must choose the most appropriate driver and activity. It is very complex to use and it is going to be expensive to operate, and it is certainly going to be more time consuming than using the traditional marginal or absorption costing method. And finally, there are some implications of switching to the ABC method. So pricing can be based more realistic on cost data, sales strategy can be more soundly based, and decision making can be improved. Performance management can be improved with this as well. So although ABC has many advantages to it, such as being able to identify the correct costs to the right products, as well as get a more accurate picture as to where you stand with how much you are actually spending, it does also have its disadvantages.